These people are so excited about constitutional law. Thank you for coming on the show. Your book, How the Supreme Court Runs on Conservative Grievance, Fringe Theories, and Bad Vibes. Explain vibes to me.
Okay, so by vibes, I kind of mean feelings and the political talking points of the Republican Party that the justices are laundering into the law or sometimes just declaring to be the law. So when they invalidated Joe Biden's student debt relief plan, they announced, indeed, they announced they didn't exactly have to follow the law, like what Congress enacted, because student debt relief raised questions that were personal and emotionally charged. I.e., it triggered them. And so that just became the law.
Are you saying the Supreme Court can have feelings and is acting on those feelings?
I'm saying they are a bunch of snowflakes.
Oh, burn notice. There's a lot of that in this. And it is very refreshing to read and hear on your podcast, Strict Scrutiny, hear people just talk shit about the Supreme Court. And is that okay to do that?
I think it's more than okay.
Okay, tell me why.
So one is I wanted to put this in a language that even Brett Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch could understand. So needed to make it accessible and whatnot. But second is I think the Supreme Court is this incredibly powerful and not well understood institution. And I wanted to make information about the Supreme Court accessible. I wanted to energize people to get involved in learning more about the Supreme Court and wanting to do something about it.
This audience seems to know a lot about the Supreme Court, but let's assume that our viewing audience, and maybe even the host, needs a refresher on what's actually happening right now in the Supreme Court. And talk to me not like a child, talk to me like a blob.
Okay. So here's the basic rule of Supreme Court Fight Club right now.
Great. That's a movie. I understand that reference.
There you go. Okay. So the basic rule is there is no discrimination against women, racial minorities, gays and lesbians, and trans people, but there is discrimination against white wingers or white right wingers, and that kind of discrimination is everywhere. And it's so prevalent that gives them the right to discriminate against everyone else, but you're not allowed to call it discrimination because that's too mean to them.
Right. So that's what's happening
basic
right now.
vibe, yes.
Well, look, Roe v. Wade was overturned, and we're all reacting to that, but I wonder, besides just reacting to that, should we be looking forward, and what else could they do?
They could do so much. I mean, I worry that the next several decades might look like a Hunger Games for liberal constitutional democracy. So after abortion, I think they are likely to come after contraception. I think they're likely to come after what remains of the Voting Rights Act. I think they are likely to come after what remains of campaign finance regulation. And so I think that they are in a position to really undo a lot of what is foundational and important about our current democracy.
We're going to talk about what we can do eventually, but I want to keep digging into this and some of the bleakness that exists. And you talk about that in the book. I feel like that's maybe a struggle you've had as an author, is like, I have to share with you the bleak shit, and we'll talk about later maybe what we can do. Let's talk a little bit about the 303 creative case. And that was something that you illuminate really well, and I think all of us could use a re-summary of what exactly happened there and how that case was almost manufactured to get a result that they wanted.
Yes, so this is a super wild case where the justices basically feel entitled to create a bunch of rules and indeed to make up cases. So the case really went back to Obergefell versus Hodges, which was the marriage equality decision that invalidated laws that prohibited marriage licenses for same-sex couples. And in that case, Justices Alito and Thomas and the other Republican appointees threw a hissy fit about how marriage equality was so unfair to people who didn't think that gays and lesbians should be able to get married. You know, Justice Alito said it would facilitate the marginalization of people with traditional views about marriage, and even said it called to mind the harsh treatment of gays and lesbians in the past, as if marriage equality was like the same thing as not allowing gays and lesbians to get married. But anyways, in that case, they said marriage equality is going to facilitate First Amendment violations of those with traditional views about marriage. And so when the justices announced that, they are basically inviting people to file First Amendment challenges to civil rights protections for the LGBT community. And that's what happened in 303 Creative. There you had this organization, the Alliance Defending Freedom, get involved in this case where they found a website designer that became a wedding website designer, that then became a religious wedding website designer, who then all of a sudden was very afraid she was going to have to make a wedding website celebrating same-sex weddings. And so that was the case that kind of was sort of before the Supreme Court, even though she hadn't actually been asked to design a website for a same-sex couple. But why decide the case in front of you when you can just play a little fantasy football? And so in that case, the justices just declared that, well, obviously refusing to make a wedding website for a same-sex couple, that's not discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. Right. Okay. I can explain that if you want explain.
Yeah.
But
I stopped listening like 6 minutes ago. So no, that's not true. That's not true. Well, no, but I mean, this is the challenge of the subject you're in.
Yes.
We as Americans can't tune out.
Right. We
have to be paying attention. And you said fantasy football, and I thought, did I make my trades this week?
Well, if we could trade some Supreme Court justices, that would be
That'd
great.
Be cool.
So, yeah, let's
Supreme
do that.
Court.
Let's do that.
What level of justice do we lose if we're artificially manufacturing cases?
I think we lose all justice whatsoever, because in that case, the justices just declared that some set of people have a right to discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation, but we don't know what set of people that is, because the case involved an imaginary wedding website designer. So we don't know exactly what group of people now has, you know, all of their prejudices protected by the Constitution. And so that case has created this spillover where now a bunch of people are asserting the right to discriminate.
Right. Let's switch gears for a second and talk about the code of ethics that either does or does not exist within the Supreme Court. I mean, you have some crazy stuff coming out with Clarence Thomas flying on private jets and yachts and having an RV, a $19,000 Bible owned by Frederick Douglass. Gorsuch and Kavanaugh were paid $30,000 to teach a 2-week course. Over and over, there's all of these things. What exactly is the code of ethics for the Supreme Court? Do they have one?
It's a code of like non-ethics. So they don't really have an actual code of ethics.
They wrote something about themselves?
They wrote a non-binding guidance document and then wanted a big party to be thrown for them because they fixed the entire problem. But then not all of them even abide by that non-binding set of principles. So basically they just kind of do whatever they want and they feel pretty entitled to be kept men. And so
this is like when I said in high school that, Mom and Dad, I think I should be in charge of my curfew.
They just get to make up the rules that apply to themselves as they go along.
Are the courts underneath the Supreme Court, is it the same for those courts?
No. Those courts actually have some rules that can be enforced against them. But, you know, when you're a Supreme Court justice, they just apparently let you do it, as someone once said, kind of.
You were a clerk at the Supreme Court.
I was.
I always assumed, as an American, that this was they were the adults in the room. That this is where things finally ended and justice was served. Right or wrong? What's it like in there?
So part of the goal,
I think I know how you're going to answer.
Part of the goal of the book is to socialize people in a different picture of the Supreme Court. And, you know, we have a guy taking a literal chainsaw to the federal government in electoral politics.
But he's not in the Supreme Court, correct?
Well, but here's the thing. He's allegedly doing so on, like, bladder-damaging levels of ketamine. They're doing it stone cold sober.
Right.
They are just saying you can't have the Clean Power Plan because there's a debate about climate regulation. You can't have student debt relief because that would be like the French Revolution. And it triggers me. You can't have the Voting Rights Act because that's too popular. And so they're doing the same thing. It's just not getting the same kind of attention.
I mean, it almost sounds like we as a society have gotten soft, but also so is our Supreme Court?
I think they have gotten soft. They've also just gotten kind of lazy. Like, they're not even trying.
They're in robes all day. I mean, it's kind of like...
They're not even trying anymore. You know, they just declare things to be the law. They make up new made-up theories with new made-up exceptions because why not? You know, with 6 Republican justices on the court, I think they feel like they have to try a little bit less, especially with Donald Trump taking so much of the attention away from them.
I respond really well to your passion and your enthusiasm and your drive. And I wonder where that comes from.
Inner rage and inner pettiness is some of it.
But there's something behind that.
Yes, okay.
And I had a Candace Parker, WNBA basketball champion, on yesterday, and I feel the same energy, and I ask her the same question, but I'm curious where it comes from you.
Yes, so I grew up in a family where the women in my family spoke very openly about what it was like to grow up in a world where women didn't have control over their own bodies, experienced sexual violence, had to drop out of school. And so seeing that world come back is very, makes me filled with incandescent rage, you know, to hear that I don't get to have rights because apparently it's really hard for some men to live in a world with feminism and women's rights, which is basically what Justice Alito said when he overruled Roe versus Wade. He said, well, that case declared a losing side and a winning side. And it's like, my guy, you literally just described how cases are decided. There is a winning side and a losing side, but I guess it's illegal when women win.
Well, it's really fun watching you talk shit to Justice Alito and listen to it and read about it. All right.
Hey, Sam.
I want to try to steer this in a positive and somewhat solution-based conclusion. What can we do? I mean, one of the things you talk about in the conclusion is just start talking about this. When you go to the dog park, don't be afraid to share with people that you think the Supreme Court isn't working right now. What else can we do?
Yeah, so I do think public information and education is a big part of this. I don't think that the Democratic Party is going to lead on this. So I think we need to build a movement of people who understand what the Supreme Court is and how it has changed and how it is changing the country. More concretely, you know, I actually believe in the power of talking shit and memes. That's part of why I'm here. But no, like, seriously, these guys are so triggered when they're criticized, and Elon Musk was basically shamed and name-called out of the federal government. So sometimes that stuff works, and I feel like we should try it here, too.
Great. Lawless is available now. Leah Litman.